It is July 30th, 2023. We are in St. Petersburg, Florida, and we are doing an oral history for Cheryl and maiden name Beale Adams.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start off with the basics. When and where were you born, and who were your parents?
I was born on June 4th, 1952 in Glover Memorial Hospital, located in Needham Heights, Massachusetts, which is, 10-15 miles west of Boston, Massachusetts. It's a Boston suburb. But I actually went home to Norwood, Massachusetts, and I think it was on 51 Sunnyvale Road, Norwood, Massachusetts.
So, how long did you live there? Do you remember?
I think until I was 4, 1956, because Mom was pregnant with Nisi, and the house on Prospect Street was being built, and they had sold the house on Sunnyvale, and had to move someplace and wait for the house to be finished, because that was a Shigori job. That was the contractor. And, things take time with contractors. So, so I was 4 when we moved. I do remember the apartment that we lived on, in between the two houses. It was on Winslow Ave, and it was a beautiful little Tudor-looking house, and it was stucco on the outside, and I loved it because it had like a little front porch thing, and you could sit out there, and it was a nice neighborhood. So that's like a vivid memory. I could walk through that front door right now and tell you where everything was, the rooms were and everything. Don't know why, but I love that house.
Was it a house or an apartment?
No, it's a house.
Oh, okay.
It's a house.
Now, what is your earliest memory?
Before we started this, I just told you about the safety pin thing. And it was, I was under the age of 2, and Mom was changing my diaper, and apparently I got a hold of the diaper pin and threw my arm up, and when I did so, the pin went into an outlet, and I shocked myself.
Did your mother panic?
Oh, I'm sure she did. I'm sure she did. I don't remember ever getting my hands on a pin after that, so, But that was the earliest memory.
Well, where did you go to kindergarten and grade school?
I went to the Shattuck School. That was about, a mile or so up the street. And we walked to school. There was a gang of us kids. We were in a new subdivision, and it was all veterans. So there's a bunch of us. And when I say we would walk to school, on a rare occasion, because my mom drove, or one of the Mrs. Boyle drove, or Mrs. Murphy drove. We'd all pile into the cars and off we go. So yeah.
Can you describe that schoolhouse, that building?
Oh my God, it was old. It was a brick building. It was set in like a little park-like atmosphere, because there was a yard to it. There were pathways up to the front door, and there was a playground in the back. And of course the playground was asphalt that had a jungle gym, so it was ready to kill. We were going to have broken arms, we would have broken collarbones, all of that stuff. You couldn't get away with that stuff now. Well, you can't get away with that stuff now, because it's like we're killing children. So yeah, but it was fun. I mean, we had a ball. But when you walked in through the front door, the offices were there, and then stairs. I remember the stairs. I remember those damn stairs were creepy.
Were they wood,
old.
cement?
Oh, they were wood. So you're literally like hanging off a wall, and you had staircases, but the handrails were a little wobbly. So I always stuck as close to the wall as I possibly could, because I figured I was just going to go flying off, because I wasn't the most coordinated child. And I wasn't the most careful child, so yeah, I just figured I'd be the one that would go sailing off.
Now, were there school resource officers there or police officers in the school?
Oh God, no. What? No. It was a safe place to be, and people had children that they reprimanded when they got out of line. So no, you didn't pull any of that crap. I mean, children were taken over the knee or were whacked with a belt. No, we did not misbehave in school. That was bullshit.
Okay, so you
wanted it authentic.
Yes, you went to. I'll be editing that out. So you went to kindergarten through 6th grade at the Shattuck School.
No, I went kindergarten to 5th grade because for 6th grade we had the brand new J.P. Oldham School that was in the neighborhood. So yeah, that was like the big thing, the new school. The old school had great teachers. I had Miss Webster, who was a fanatic on English, and then I had Mrs. Gavin, who was just all about manners and being Boston and having the best Boston accent ever. And she'd tell us stories. She was friends with this guy called Red Skelton, who was an actor at the time, and she would tell us stories about Red Skelton and his wife and how they would come over for dinner. Now, Red Skelton had a TV show. You would have to look that up. And we were all just like, ooh, because she knew like a movie star. And she was very proud of that fact. But she was such a classy woman, and she dressed beautifully. And I just loved her to death. I mean, my actual love of English and reading, I think, came from her, because she was just wonderful. She was a wonderful teacher.
Any other elementary school teachers stand out in your mind, what they did for you?
Miss Webster and Mrs. Gavin were the two that had the most effect. Mrs. Gavin was my 5th grade teacher. And then we went on to the new elementary school, the Oldham School, and Mr. Watson was the 6th grade teacher, my teacher, and that was the first time I'd ever had a male teacher. And I didn't quite know what to do with all of that, because it was like, wow. And he was a really nice guy. He was a young guy. I don't think he had been teaching all that long, but he was great with the students. And I remember that my friend Sherry Leeson and I decided to prank poor Mr. No, we were just hideous children. We decided to prank him because he was so devoted to these students. So we decided, we're 12 years old and a bit precocious, we decided that we needed to ask him questions about boys. His face turned so red. And then we finally had to tell him that we were just like joking around. And then it got really red because he was pissed. But he didn't dare tell us.
That sounds pretty interesting. Poor teacher. So after 6th grade, you went to junior high. Was that 3 years, 7th, 8th, and 9th?
No. There wasn't anything like that back then. It was 7th and 8th. And that too was like a very old building. And that too had the rickety handrails. So I hated anything that had to be on the 2nd floor. And, most of the classes were on the 2nd floor. So we were running up the stairs and down the stairs after classes. And then we'd have to go down to the basement for whatever the heck was down there. But it was an old building. There was no cafeteria. You had to bring your own lunch. And I spent 2 years having egg salad or tuna fish salad sandwiches, unrefrigerated. Why I didn't have ptomaine is beyond me. But yep, that's what we did. That's what we did.
Any
Hated
teachers?
it.
Any teachers stand out from junior high?
Oh yeah, and not in a good way.
Okay.
There was one teacher, her name was...
No names, just describe. She could have relatives.
I'm sure they understood this woman. Anyway, the minute I walked into her classroom, I mean, she hated me. I had done nothing other than walk into her classroom, and she was my algebra teacher. And she had me such a wreck because she'd pick on me that it finally got to the point where I couldn't even concentrate. I couldn't do the homework. I couldn't do anything. It was literally paralyzing me. And my dad went up to the school and said this. I mean, she was a bully. And my dad went up to the school and made it known that I was not going to be in her class anymore. I was going to be transferred out of there because, Daddy was a pretty imposing person. He was not, he would brook no nonsense. And I was transferred out of that class the next day and into another classroom, and he was fabulous. I mean, he made learning fun, and I ended up getting like an A or a B.
It sounds from what you've been saying about elementary school and junior high that you were a good student academically and also as behavior.
I would love to say that I was a well-behaved child. I was precocious. I was social, and that's what every report card ever said. Cheryl likes to speak to her neighbors, and in 4th grade, it got with Miss Webster. It got so bad that during a PTA meeting, Miss Webster informed Daddy that I was just a bit too talkative. So the following day, he came home from work with these little business-sized cards, and every day he would hand me a card, and it said, "Did Cheryl talk in school today? Yes or no?" And at the end of the day, I would have to hand this card to Miss Webster, and she would check it off. And I got to tell you, it almost killed me to not talk to my neighbors in class, because I was an interesting child, and I thought everything was interesting. So I like to talk about everything, not necessarily what Miss Webster wanted to talk about. So it was, I don't want to say I was disruptive. I probably was, but I didn't mean to be. I was just interested. And she didn't appreciate it. So, yeah.
Well, about this time, let's see, you're in junior high, so you're looking at 1964?
Well, Miss Webster was grammar school.
Yeah.
So that was 4th grade, so I was, 10 maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know. Once I got into junior high, that was a whole different thing.
Yeah.
The teachers treated you differently. They treated you more like you were, I hesitate to say grown up, but you weren't treated like the little kid anymore. They had expectations, which I appreciated. I didn't like being treated like a child. I was a very bright child. And that was the problem. I was a bright child, and I got bored, and I was not an A student. I did okay, but mostly because I hated homework. I didn't hate learning. I loved learning. I just hated the homework, and I didn't test well because I would get so nervous, anxious, that I would literally make myself sick.
Well, who was the one teacher in junior high that there's always one teacher that's going to recognize that a student needs to be challenged more? Who would you say that was in junior high?
I'm going to say Paul Lauren. He was was he high school? No, I think he was junior high. He was a creative writing teacher, and he's the first one who said, he said, "You have a talent for writing." He said, "You're a good storyteller." And that made me feel good, because it was kind of like, okay, so I'm yakking and talking and disrupting people, but I'm also telling stories. And he thought that they were good enough to be written down. And I actually ended up being in a book. It was the student anthology of poetry or something or other. It was a national thing, and I got it in there. And it wasn't my favorite poem, but they thought it was good, so they published it. I'm trying to think. Were there other teachers? Yeah, there were other teachers. Mr. Bethany, who was my high school history teacher, ancient history teacher. We got along great, and actually Daddy and Mr. Bethany became friendly. And after Daddy passed away, Mr. Bethany would still check on me and make sure I was okay. He was an extraordinary guy, and I'll have to tell you about him on another thing. But just what happened to him after he quit teaching was just like, holy smokes.
We can get into your high school years on the next taping. While you were still younger, your family went to the New York World's Fair, the last one, as a matter of fact, before Disney opened up, correct?
I think so.
Yeah, 1964-65.
Yeah, that was amazing.
What was that like?
I remember Daddy coming home and saying that we had been invited to stay at the Duffy's place, and Daddy and the Duffys, and Mr. Duffy was sort of like a business friend, and he was much older than Daddy, so he kind of looked at Daddy like a son, treated Daddy like a son, which was really quite lovely. The Duffys had like a city place in Manhattan, that's in New York, and he invited us as a family to stay at their place in Manhattan on Park Avenue, which it was pretty la-di-da. Park Avenue was where all the rich people lived, and we could stay there and go to the World's Fair. So we went. We stayed there for a few days. The apartment was lovely. It had a doorman. It was all fancy. And I was impressed. And I was just a kid, so you can only imagine.
Did you fly down?
Oh no, we drove. New York was a drive.
Ah.
It took all freaking day, but it was a drive.
So it's, how many siblings did you have?
It was the three of us in the back seat of, and I forget which car it was probably an Oldsmobile. Was, the cranky little kid. The baby. Anyway, we drove, probably in the Oldsmobile. There were three of us in the back seat. You know how that goes. Nisi was touching me. The hours in the car.
Who's Nisi?
Nisi was our sister, Denise. Denise Jean Beale.
Was she older or younger?
Oh, she was 4 years older than me. 4 years younger than me, and 4 years older than Brother Bill. And she was absolutely adorable as a kid because she had like the Shirley Temple hair, the ringlets, and she was tall. She was a very tall child, and she ended up being 6 feet tall, as a matter of fact. I'm the shortest one at 5'8" when I was actually tall before this. Anyway, yeah. So Nisi sat in the middle, of course. She didn't like being in the middle. And, no, that's wrong. Billy was in the middle. Yeah, Billy was in the middle, because that was the safest place. The two girls could get bounced out of the car in an accident. That was okay, but as long as the son was taken care of, we were fine. So yes, we got to New York all in one piece. Got to the penthouse. That was lovely. And then made our way over via taxi, and it was the first time in a taxi. And they drive like maniacs in New York. And they dropped us off at I think it was called Flushing Meadows. And if you've been to Disney, they have in Epcot they have this like big, huge ball, and that ball is based on the globe that they had at the World's Fair, which was pretty impressive.
So what'd you see?
Well, it's kind of funny because speaking of Disney, one of the things that we saw was I think it was called The World of Progress. And in it was the Carousel of Progress. So if you've been there, you see how it shows what we have now, which is kind of crazy. But TVs where you can see each other and talk to each other, which effectively is like having Zoom. Cell phones, just all this wonderful stuff, the appliances, and it was all just like ooh ah back then, and now it's like no big deal. I mean, we have all of this stuff, and that was in a very short space of time, because I'm 71, so that was 64, so I was like 11 years old. So in that short space of time, all of this technology has evolved, and it's amazing.
Did you go anywhere else besides the World's Fair while in New York?
We went to this place called the Horn and Hardhat Cafeteria. Now, I know it doesn't sound like much, but this is a place where you walked in and you had your change, and all of your food was in like these little cubicles, and you dropped in your quarter or whatever, and the quarter went in, and you pulled on the door, and there was your sandwich or your coffee or whatever. So you had to have a lot of change, because everything was a quarter or a dime or whatever. And Daddy thought that was just the funnest thing. That man. Yeah, he thought that was like really fun. So yeah, it was like he just kept giving us change.
Wasn't that a New York icon at the time?
Yeah, it was. I mean, if you were in New York, you went there. Either you went there for breakfast, or you went there for lunch, or you went there for supper. It was like because these food containers. And when I say food containers, I mean it was like row after row after row, and it was like all pies and this, all sandwiches and this, and it went all the way around the interior of the building. So yeah, that was a lot of fun, and I think I distinctly remember Daddy saying something about this is an icon or something like that. I'm sure.
Did he give you the story behind it?
He probably did, because he knew that stuff. And, that's something that I think we inherited from him, because there's always a story, there's always a history. And he was great for saying that. There's a history behind this, and we would hear the history. So no surprise that we're history buffs. I don't recall, I'm sure we did go other places, but we were only there for a few days.
So you didn't see the UN?
Yes, we did.
What was that like?
I didn't understand the significance. I remembered the architecture, because even at that age, I was kind of an architecture buff. And I remember being really impressed, and Daddy was saying, see all of those flags? People from all of those countries are in here trying to maintain peace. And that just stuck out in my head, because it was like, really? And they're all here. Now you have to understand, this is not, World War II had only been over for like 20 years, not even 20 years. So it was still kind of fresh. War was fresh, and the sacrifices were fresh. And there were countries that were still rebuilding from World War II. So to have their representatives all in New York trying to maintain a peace was kind of a major thing. And even at that age, although I didn't really understand what it was about, I knew it was a big thing. And all of those flags, I didn't know that there were that many countries.
Well, wasn't your father a veteran of World War II and of that greatest generation, the young men? Do you think that's why?
Well, it may have been. I know that Daddy tried desperately to, yep, that's an alarm going off, sorry folks. Daddy tried desperately to get into the service, and Daddy had high blood pressure. And like yourself, it was, they were all saying, no bueno, you can't, we're not going to take you. Eventually, The Coast Guard took him because he was a great trombone player, and they needed people for the USO band. So they brought him in. Daddy never saw. Daddy learned to swim when he was like 40 something. So yeah, he was in the Coast Guard, couldn't swim a stroke, and they just wanted him to play, and play he did. So yeah, he was more for morale, but he felt like he was doing his bit. But I know that he thought that he should have been out there. They all did. That whole generation, for the most part, felt like they needed to do something for the war effort, so they did what they could, and that was Daddy's contribution.
Well, back to the trip to New York.
Yeah.
We can get into that a little later. Did you go anywhere else? Stock exchange, maybe?
No. We were only there for a couple of days, and we spent 2 days at the World's Fair, as I recall. I mean, my mind is like, you're asking me to remember a very long time ago. There were things that impressed me, and obviously, and I'm sure that there were other things that I saw, but they didn't hit me hard, I guess. You could bring something up and I might say, oh yeah, I remember that now, but it's escaping me at the moment.